So, good afternoon, one and all. Again, we're in for a treat, and it's my pleasure to introduce Pir Nawab Pasnak, the Pir of the Sufi movement. And when we exchange emails, it's always my dear brother Nawab, my dear brother Elias, back and forth, and it comes quite easy to us. And I've been wondering, in a sense, the Sufi, as you've heard some of the inter-Nicene history of us, the Sufi way, sort of, our mother was the Sufi movement. And I never met my brother Nawab back in the old days, before the divorce, you could say. But that's right, before they changed the water. So, but we did meet subsequently, and this, speaking of being brothers, somehow fits quite easily between us. I'm sure we're quite different and in many ways, and yet, after all, he's Canadian and I'm American. So, but he's more Norwegian and Portuguese now than. Although I was just ribbing him about being. Yeah, well, he also lives a lot of time in Holland, in the Netherlands, and in India, so he's sort of multinational. In any case, it's a great pleasure to have you join us and share your, reflections at this time about what Sufism has come to mean to you, what love means to you, and anything else it's in your heart to say to us. So we're happy to have you with us. Oh, and this other gentleman, by the way, Brother Isha will, after Nawab gives some remarks, will also, provoke him a little bit with some reflections and then a question, and start our question and answer session. So I'll leave it to you two, and thanks for being here, both.
Thank you, dear brother Elias. And thank you all for being here. Thank you for the privilege to spend some time together. When I was invited, the theme was left quite broad, and I feel it's still quite broad, and so I'm not really sure where to begin. I feel a little bit like there's that story about Nasruddin. I've told this story so many times that some of you will have heard it before, that Mullah Nasruddin acquired the reputation of knowing something. And the king of that country said, let's invite him to the court so that we can hear some of his wisdom. And so the invitation was sent. Probably someone with livery and white gloves came with the invitation. Nasruddin did everything he could to avoid this because he didn't really want to go play like a tame monkey at the court. But finally he had to come. And so he came to the court, came and stood in front. There's the king. There are all the noble courtiers. That's you, I guess. And he said, and you're the king, I guess. I'm not sure. Yeah, good. Yes, very good. And Nasruddin said to them all, "Do you know what I have come to talk to you about?" And they said, "No." And he said, "Well, if you don't even know the subject, what's the point in talking to you?" And he left. Kings are stubborn. And the king said, "We're going to get him back here, and we'll be ready for him this time." So another invitation was sent. Nasruddin tried to delay. "No, I'm busy that day," and so on. But finally, he had to come. He came. There, the king was there. The courtiers were there. He came and stood in front of them. And again, he said, "Do you know what I have come to talk to you about?" And the king was very happy because this is what he was hoping for. And all the people said, "Yes." And Nasruddin said, "Well, if you know, I don't have to say anything." And he left. Well, the king in our story was very stubborn. Can you do very stubborn? Very good. Very good. Yes. So the king said, "We're going to get him back, and this time we'll really fix him." So they invited Nasruddin. He tried to delay. He finally had to come. He came. The king is there. All the people are there. And Nasruddin doesn't learn. He asked the same question. "Do you know what I have come to talk to you about?" And this time, half of the room said, "Yes." And half of the room said, "No." And Nasruddin said, "Well, those who know can tell those who don't know." So, do you know what I have come to talk to you about? So at one point, it was suggested that perhaps I would talk about the essence of Sufism. And that's a very attractive sounding topic. The problem, of course, is that when you get as essential as the essence of Sufism, there's nothing you can say. There are no words for it. And in any case, Sufism, if it is Sufism at all, it should be experiential. It's not something that Pir Elias or Pir Nawab or Pir Isha can tell you, Sufism is this. It's not something you can read in a book, not even the Holy Scriptures. They point the way, but that's not, the way is not the journey, if you understand what I mean. You can follow the journey on your GPS, but that's not the same as actually going there. So, if there is Sufism, it has to be something that each person experiences for themselves. And how does it work? How does it start? Where does it begin? The only way into the path of Sufism is by meeting someone who changes your life in some way. It may be a way that at first you don't even perceive, and yet there's a click somewhere. Maybe you've had that experience. You're lying in bed at night and you hear a noise in the house. What was that? And you get up and you wander all through the house trying to find what it was that made that noise. And this is a little bit like the experience of meeting someone. And usually it's not someone who proclaims, who claims, who says, I am Sufi or I am spiritual, and yet there's something alive in that person, and in meeting them you feel, oh, something woke up, something is moving in me. It's always in you. There's a lot of external show in every tradition. People go on pilgrimages, they adopt disciplines, sometimes very hard disciplines, and yet it's only by what happens inside you that the truth is discovered, because you can't acquire spirituality. How could you acquire spirituality? Spirituality is discovering what is in you already, is your nature. And in fact, every baby that's born on earth is spiritual, but we get distracted, we forget. We become intoxicated with our senses, we fall into the Hollywood show of life, and we forget about what's really going on inside. And so all of the Sufi path, all of the Sufi practices are really only given to help us discover who we are. There's a great tragedy in the world. There always has been, but right now it's very acute. And we look at the externals of the world. We look at the problems of the climate, of pollution, of war, terrorism, starvation, all of those problems. What's underneath them is the problem that most people don't know who they are. And that's why it's so, I shouldn't say it's easy, but there are thousands and thousands of websites that commodify various paths and spiritual techniques because people are so hungry for that, for something that will help them to discover who they are. There's another story, and I've told this story before many times too. This was a story that Hazrat Inayat Khan sometimes told. That there was a young man whose father was a great peer, even greater than Pir Elias. I'm sorry, but really, I mean, and he was a great peer, and he had many hundreds and thousands of students, and so great that among those students there were many murshids, teachers. Naturally, this young man grew up in a really extraordinary environment. It was a home full of reverence and learning and beauty and harmony. I hope your home is also harmonious. I can't say the same for mine, but anyway. So he grew up in a wonderful environment. One night, this young man had a dream, and he dreamt that he and his papa were flying through the sky, through the night sky. Do you ever have a dream where you're flying? Yeah. So he was flying with his papa past the planets and the stars and the comets, and at last they came to a place where it was the gathering of the saints. And there, his father was warmly welcomed. Oh, welcome, come on in. But the young man was not permitted. He was not allowed to enter. In the morning, he was very troubled by this dream. And he went to his papa and he said, "Whoa, what is this? What does this dream mean?" And his father, wise father, said, what this dream means is that if you want to follow this path, to be my son is not sufficient. You need to have a murshid. The young man was surprised. He said, "But Papa, there's no better murshid in the whole country than you. Can't you be my murshid?" And I think all the fathers here will understand. The murshid said, "No, no, I'm no good for that. But if you'll take my advice, I can recommend someone for you." "Oh yeah, sure, yeah, please." And then his father surprised him again by telling him the name of a murshid that lived way out in the country, a farmer who in fact didn't even know how to read and write. And the young man thought, what can I learn from such a person? But he said he'd take his father's advice. So, okay. So he got ready for the journey. Probably his mama gave him some lunch. And he set off. And as he went, he was thinking, I wonder what my training is going to be like. Because, of course, he'd heard all kinds of stories about, and he'd seen people fasting doing long fasts, or going into seclusion, or other kinds of self-disciplines, and he hoped that he would have the courage, the strength to go through whatever training his new murshid would give him. So he's thinking these thoughts, and he's going along through the countryside, and he starts to come near the farm where his murshid lives, and he sees the murshid coming along the track towards him, riding an old farm horse. And they come together in the path, and the murshid, of course, is a murshid. He knows why the boy is here. Looks down at the boy. The boy bows in greeting. And the murshid says, "Not enough." So, the young man bows again. He bows lower now. His head is down to whatever that's called in a horse. The knee of the horse. I think it's actually called the pastor in English, but I don't know. I'm not a horse specialist. He bows lower. The murshid again says, "Not enough." He bows still lower. Not enough. Finally, he stretches himself in the dust of the road, and he humbly touches the hoof of his murshid's horse in greeting. And then the murshid really surprises him. The murshid says, "Very good. You can get up. You can go home now. Your training is done." Now, of course, this was not really the end of his training. There's no such thing as, there, everything is done, now I'm spiritual, hooray. Would be nice, wouldn't it? But it doesn't work that way. But it was what he needed to learn at that moment from that murshid, which was humility. He had all of the gifts of growing up with his papa, the reverence, the devotion, the learning, all that was already his heritage. But he needed to know how to be humble. And with that, he was ready. So, this is to show that it's not about acquiring anything, it's actually about letting go of something. Surely you've heard the expression, anyone who's been in contact with Sufism has heard the expression, die before death. Is there anybody who never heard that before? No. Ah, okay, then I'm talking to you. Die before death sounds very dramatic. It sounds like, okay, maybe it's a suicide cult or something. But in fact, the only thing that keeps us from knowing the truth is our own self, is our own attachment to our me, to our identity. And so, in order to realize the truth that is there now, is with us now, because it never went away. We went away, but it never went away. The only way to realize that truth is for a moment to forget ourselves. And we've all had that experience temporarily. Every one of us has had moments where maybe we're gazing at the face of a newborn baby, or maybe we're gazing at a sunset or a sunrise, or maybe we're listening to an extraordinary piece of music or a really good poem, and we forget ourselves for a moment. We just, oh yeah, I've got a train to catch. We come back. So, in order to really erase that self, sounds less dramatic than kill that self. In order to put that self on pause, we have to have something more overwhelming even than a sunset or the face of a baby. And for lack of a better word, we could say that is our ideal, our divine ideal. In different traditions, they speak of, they give different names to God, but you don't have to talk about God. There are people here who say, "Oh, God, that's old talk. That's obsolete now. We don't talk about God." Okay. What about truth? Is there anyone here who doesn't believe there's truth? Oh, thank God, no hands went up. Or love? Love, truth. You can use whatever name you want, but you need to have an ideal, and it has to become something that fills you until there's nothing left. The more you pour your heart into it, the more it responds. We talk about love. I know that's also one of the themes of this sacred gathering. Everyone talks about love. And often, when they talk about love, what they mean is, oh, I wish someone would love me. It feels nice to be loved, but that's not really knowing what love is. You only know what love is when you love. Um, let's go back to our example of the baby. The baby, most babies, when they're born, are loved. But they forget that. They go out into the world and they get wild and they steal cars and do all the things that kids do. And they forget about being loved. When the baby is born, the parents may have thought they knew what is love, but suddenly they discover what love really is. Everything changes. And they sacrifice everything for the baby. Because that's what love is. It's sacrifice. It's self-sacrifice. It's saying, okay, yeah, I wanted to do this, but you don't want to. Okay, fine. That's okay. We'll do something else. And that self-sacrifice is what helps you to know the real power, the transformative power of love. Love is another word for God. If you make your ideal either love or truth or peace alive, then it will make you alive. Because you'll forget yourself completely in that love or that truth or that peace. And then it will be always with you. It's always with you now, but we forget. And by the way, that's why the Sufis have a practice which they call zikr. Have you done zikr here in this group? Okay, then you already know. The word zikr means remembrance. It doesn't mean add to me the truth. It means to remember what was there already. And so the practice is remembrance. And it's much easier when you have a feeling of love for the divine. So, I don't know where we are yet. Is it?
I have no idea where we are. I mean, I'm enjoying being here wherever it is.
Yeah, okay, fine, yeah. I'll say one or two things more, and then I'll let Isha take over. One of the great difficulties that there are several difficulties that we face in the world today. Now everybody's looking intent. Yes? One is the sort of commercialization, the commodification of life. The idea that you can measure and quantify and pay for happiness and all the pleasures that we waste our time on instead of looking for real happiness. So that materialism is one problem. And another problem, which I think is actually a corollary of this first problem, is the loss of understanding of what it means to be a student. A student. Because remember the story of the boy who went, and prostrated his, touched the hoof of his murshid's horse. He didn't know where this was going, this interaction with the murshid, but he trusted that it was going somewhere. And he was willing to put himself in the hands of this person that his father had guided him to. It's extremely common in the Western world, and is becoming also common in the Eastern world, for people to to think that they can drive the bus themselves. That I took a course in this, and now I think I'll go and take a weekend workshop in that, and then I'll start to teach. And the problem is that in order to really learn, you have to admit that you don't know. As long as you think you know, then you're never going to reach where you want to go. And it's that willingness to bow down and touch the carpet, put your head on the carpet, that gives you freedom to learn. And that's why in Sufism, and not just Sufism, in fact all the mystical traditions, the connection between the teacher and the student is something sacred. It's not because the teacher has an ego that needs to be, there's a Dutch word, ophimmeld. It doesn't have to be lifted up to heaven. The ego of the teacher, he couldn't care less. He's just there because he thinks maybe he can be of help to this person. But it's useful to the student to have someone that they can bow to, that they can respect. And it's of no use to the student if they say, well, I've been with you for 3 weeks and I still don't know how to fly, so I'm going to go next door and see what they teach there. That doesn't take you anywhere, because it's the wonderful virtue of respect, loyalty, patience, fidelity, all those qualities that help to overcome, let's be honest, the pride that all of us have. Because that feeling that, yeah, I can do it myself, is pride. And there's good pride and there's bad pride. It's kind of a gross way to put it, but we're all children of God. We all have the divine spark in us. That's something to be proud of. That's something to honor and respect. But we're all also blundering idiots. And that's something to be not proud of. Sorry to put it so bluntly. So that's about lineage. And all Sufi groups have got some kind of lineage where they trace I am the student of this one, who was the student of that one, who was the student of that one. And in a way, in one way it doesn't matter, doesn't mean anything. What matters is the ray of sunshine that falls on your face in the morning and the kiss of the wind on your cheek. That's what matters. But in another way, that tradition is something living, and it deserves respect, and it helps you, because when you accept help from your guide, you're also accepting help from the guide of your guide, and the guide of your guide, and so on, all the way up. And they're living presence. They're there. Some of you have been, I know some of you have been to India. Maybe you've seen the tomb of Hazrat Inayat Khan, the Dargah, or other Dargahs. And those are places where, although the body is buried, the spirit is really alive. You know, you've been there, you've been to the Dargah of Hazrat Inayat Khan, there's a living feeling there that is different from outside, somewhere else. So that's one aspect of Sufism, is the respect for tradition. What else can I say about the essence of Sufism? Love. Yeah, I haven't talked enough about love. Do we ever talk enough about love? Well, in another way, I mean, talking about love, what's that? The mystics say that what you weep for, you will get. If you weep for riches, too bad. That's what you'll get. You'll get material gain. And that's all you'll get. But if you weep for love, and if you weep for the source of love, that source will not withhold itself from you. You will be welcomed and embraced. Maybe I'll pause there and let you talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. Okay, you have to take a chance here. Am I working? No. What do I do? Do I have to push a button here, Hans? Oh!
There you go.
Can you hear me now? Good, thank you. I'm going to resist, Nawab, I'm going to resist the temptation to dive right back at you with questions about some things that I really would like to explore, but I want to drift away for a minute and not ignore the really interesting reality of you and I being here in the Dargah and what that in some interesting way may mean for all of us.
Here in the temple.
Yes.
Yeah.
The temple, sorry. Yeah. Most of my life, I thought of Sufism with the metaphor that they like to use of a tree. And the tree grows out and there are many branches. Yeah, there are many branches and they grow and some will die and fall off one branch or another, but they will keep going. I have become a little dissatisfied with that image simply because the branches don't kind of directly interact quite so much as I would like to think they ought to. And so I like this image of a tapestry instead. The tapestry has no limits on its outside. It just continues to grow. But the tapestry is woven through our experience. And what I want to, for a moment, take you on a little journey with these weaves is the story that we share, Nawab and I share, without, for the most part, ever having been in the same place or the same time, either here or at the Dargah in Delhi. In 1975, my wife Fadu and I moved here to Katwijk from England. And when I walked literally in the door, Murshid Fazl put an enormous glom of keys in my hand and said to me, "You are the vakil, you're in charge of the building. Whatever's going to happen there, they have to go through you to get it done." I had no idea. I was 27 years old, maybe. I was, frankly, just barely an ex-hippie. I had nothing except whatever it was that he said I had. And he said I had this place. I'd never had a place before, I mean, except when I was a child. Suddenly I have this place. What a challenge it was. Because not only am I dealing with that, I'm dealing with the fact, as we all were, those youngsters who came here, that there was an entire presence and population and culture of old Sufis. Yeah, well, look at this beard when I say that phrase now. Yeah. In those days, we were dark-haired and dark-bearded, and they were the old Sufis, and we were the new guys, and we knew better. We knew better. For about 10 minutes. And then we began to learn what we didn't know.
Yeah.
We began to learn that there was much we didn't know. And as I reflect on that now, I realize that that was the beginnings of a particular teaching for me that has become very important, which was that I had to surrender my certainty of things. Mm-hmm. I had to let go of whatever it was I was certain of. Now, that's very easy to say, but it takes time. So in any case, so I was here 1975 to 78, went away for a couple of years, and then in the middle of the night in Los Angeles, got a phone call from Murshid Fazl saying, we'd like you to go to India. Okay, what are we supposed to do in India? Well, don't worry about it, you'll figure it out. Yeah, so we fly here, we fly to Holland, we meet with Murshid Fazl and beloved and invaluable spirit, Karim Bakhsh-Teveng, and they described what they thought was going to happen in Delhi, which was to do with the Dargah, with the place where Hazrat Inayat Khan was buried. Now he was buried in a place that was, I suppose it's fair to say, the land was granted to the Sufi movement or to the family for him to be buried there in what's called Basti Nizamuddin. It's a very, to Muslim Sufis in India, it's a really very special, very important, sacred place. But the place itself was, can I be frank? It was a dump. It was terrible. You walked into this grungy little alley and you had to go up these little horrible little steps, excuse me, and yeah, there was a thing there, a stone there that had some Arabic or Urdu language on it, and you were assured that that's where he was buried. That was it. That's what you got. And you made the best of it as you could. Miraj Nizami was already the Qawwali every Friday. He was coming to the Dargah to sing. And this was what my wife Fadla and I walked into, was, what are we doing here? Well, what we were doing here was we were the after Kiran had done some work, Murshid Kiran had done some work, we were the point of the spear to begin to acquire land, to begin to negotiate with tenants around the Dargah to leave, to provide them with some other place to live. This isn't like, landlord law in Holland or in America or something. There's no law. If you wanted somebody to leave, there was only one way you could get them to leave. And that was, yes, thank you, Prosecutor, it was to pay them. So one quick side story about that. One tenant, Tamsil Ahmed, I believe his name was, who was living adjacent to the Dargah. Tamsil didn't want money. He didn't, this story about, teach them to fish or feed them fish, right? He wanted a printing press. He wanted a printing press from Europe. And the smartest fellow I think I ever met there. He saw, if I'm going to go through this change, I'm not just moving to another hovel. I'm not just going to another place where I'm going to be unhappy, where I can't take care of my family. I'm going to have a way to live. And it took, I don't know, upwards of a year or so. Somehow, Dr. Witteveen, bless his soul, he worked some way out, so we ended up with a really good quality, used German printing press arriving in Delhi. And you don't even want to think about the customs that was involved with it. So anyway, sorry, I get distracted here with these stories. So there's the Dargah, and we're very much involved. And this is all, I say we were the spearhead, but the truth is, Murshid Fazil and Karambaksh were the spearhead. They were the ones with the inspiration to make this happen, and particularly Dr. Winterveen was the man who either had money or knew people who could give money to make this happen. So we were there for 2 years. We saw the construction of the primary outside wall facing the main street near the Dargah. We saw some work done inside, and then we moved on. Others came in. Sharon L. Storm, some of you may know, came and lived there. David Burton came and lived there. Wally and Wally van Lohausen came and lived there. There may be others I've lost track of. I'm sure there are, because at some point you do lose track. My point here is that all of that was happening. We were winding our way around that. It was winding its way around us, just as this place had done to us when we lived here. And in 2009, we come back to Delhi for the first time in all these, so that's 1982. The first time we come back and we visit the Dargah for a big Urs celebration. And who do I meet? I meet Nawab for the first time, right? And we're there a part of the celebration. So his life has wound its way around. He hasn't had the chance to tell the story I'm telling, but there is one there. And we find ourselves in Delhi together without knowing that what's happening today is going to happen. And now today I find myself sitting with him. And I told him earlier, I said, I'm just so struck by the weave. It reached out there and it wove around and extended, and it's brought us back to this place together. And I just think that's, it's something. It's something that we, Elias talked about the divorce, if you want to call it that. I was in the middle of that mess too. But at a certain point, the Sufi way became the Sufi way. Pir Murshid Fazil Inayat Khan was the peer of the Sufi way. The Sufi movement remained. They have figured out over time and complications, which I know nothing about, I'm not unhappy to say, that they have figured that out.
I wish I could say the same.
And it's also true with the group now called the Inayatiya, used to be called the Sufi Order, that Pir Vilayat's organization originally. And it's also true of the Ruhaniyat, which comes from, kind of a really different angle on the tradition. We are all there in this tapestry. We are all there. But what's important to me is that we're here in this tapestry, that there's like there's a little glow to some of the threads for a moment at least. The light is shining just right, and that light is shining on Nawab and me and extending back in time through the Dargah, coming to, it's a beautiful place now. I didn't recognize it when I went back to visit. It was, oh my God, just great work that they've done. So that's kind of what happened when I realized I was going to be sitting up here with you. And those are concrete and bricks, literally. Lots of bricks. Same in India. Lots of bricks, lots of design work, lots of people involved. But while we're here, we now can also look at, okay, that's the kind of the past. The past has led us here. This is our present, but it's also the whole story of our engagement with all of this. And I look at that and I find myself wondering, what's next? Yeah, not what's next necessarily and where am I going to go next, or, I know you're flying away in a day or two or something like that, but what do you see, or can you express something of what you see with the Sufi lineage that we all represent, that we all manifest in this tapestry, for moving forward with the world that we seem to be encountering more and more. There's more and more drama out there. How much of that drama to give into? how much to surrender to, how much to resist and say, no, I'm not going to go there. However we do that. What can you say a little bit about your view, your vision of not just the movement, but what we carefully call the message, what we're carrying forth as a message?
So, thank you, Isha. Before I get to your question, since you talked about the Dargah, I'll just say that there are a couple of times a year that are very good for visiting. Every February 5th, we celebrate the passing of Hazrat Inayat Khan. And that's a very special time. If you don't know, in Sufi traditions, the passing away of an illuminated soul is something to celebrate, because the soul is like a wedding. The soul has gone to the beloved. And so every February 5th, we have a festival. And because he was himself a great musician, now our tradition is to have really good Indian classical musicians come and play for us. They're happy to come. They like to be invited because it's an honor. They offer their art to the saint. So that's a good thing to come to. And if I haven't put you off entirely, every October I have a retreat there. So you're welcome to find out about it and contact me. And now coming back to your question. So Sufism, in most of its history, in most of its recognized history, has been something that was on the edges of society. There might be, for example, a murshid who's got a small group of people somewhere out on the edge of town, and they have their meetings regularly, and he works with the ones that come to him, but he doesn't interact much with the overall community. Or if they do, it's only to offer food or whatever they can do to help people. But when Hazrat Inayat Khan came to the West, he began to give what he called the Sufi message. And he was at great pains to emphasize that this is not any different from the message that was given by all the great teachers, by Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, Krishna, all of them. They all say basically the same thing. They put it in different ways according to the people to whom they are speaking. As Hazrat Inayat Khan said, you know, in the Buddha in China has Chinese eyes. That's normal. You adapt. But the message is the same. But why then did he talk about the Sufi message? Only because he said now it's the duty of the Sufis to give it to the world. And that doesn't mean that we believe or assume or even hope that millions of people are going to come and ask for initiation and become Sufis, card-carrying Sufis. Only it means that those who are on the Sufi path have the opportunity to give that message in a non-sectarian way to the world. And Hazrat Inayat Khan, in his teaching, the real carrier of that universal message was what he called universal worship. It's that ceremony with the candles and the scriptures of different religions, because the idea was that if we could get people to stand side by side regardless of their religion and worship together and feel that sense of community, then the world could be a better place. This has become much harder to sell than you might think, because there's a real countercurrent against religion right now. People think religion is superstition, it's archaic, it's got nothing to do with smartphones, it's something that we don't need anymore. But if you understand religion properly, meaning if you understand it in its spirit and not just by looking at the forms and the buildings and the rituals, but if you understand the spirit, you'll see that in fact we need religion more than we've ever needed it. And I hope that maybe those who taste the Sufi bread, you could say, will be able to pass that on. Not to get people to be Sufis. I mean, if they want to be, welcome, fine, okay. But just so that people can tolerate each other, be kind to each other, live together in harmony. That's the point of the message.
Can I just, before I turn it over to the folks here, I want to just extend that a little bit to the earlier, when you were talking, you talked for a certain point about an internal realization for the individual, that the experience, if you will, the transformation is something that is inside for each of us. How does that sense of an experience of evolution, of growth, how does that tie to what you're describing for the individual or the aura group?
I think it's very common when people embark on a spiritual path, and sometimes it takes us a while to recognize that in fact we have started some kind of a spiritual path. But when we start to do some work to wonder, how am I doing? What's my progress? Have I got to level 3 yet? Of course, the truth is that you can never know. You can never judge, because in order to judge your condition, you would have to be able to get outside of yourself. And if you could get outside of yourself, you wouldn't have any more work to do. You'd be done. But there are, nevertheless, it's possible to perceive that, oh, you know, I think I see things a little more clearly than I did before. Or, yeah, I don't get as angry as I used to. That person used to wind me up so much, but now, yeah, fine, okay, let him be what he is. I don't care. We become more tolerant. We become more forgiving. We become more adaptable. The first thing that I ever heard about Sufism was that a Sufi is someone who has 2 points of view. His own and that of the other person. And it sounds in a way like, it's a Nasruddin story. There is that Nasruddin story. Nasruddin is a judge, and the case comes before him, and the plaintiff makes some long complaint, and Nasruddin says, yes, you are right. And then the defendant gets up and says, but Your Honor, and makes long song and dance about it, and Nasruddin says, yes, you are right. And then the clerk of the court gets up and says, but Nasruddin, they can't both be right. And Nasruddin says, yes, you are right. So it sounds a little bit like that. But when you make room in yourself for another person's opinion, it's not a cop-out. In fact, it makes you larger. You grow. And if you can have space in yourself for one other opinion, then what about 2 or 4 or 8 or 16? You can keep growing exponentially until you've got room for everyone's opinion. And that would be whether we call it Sufism or not, that would be Sufism taking over the world.
Wow.